Hi, I'm Pastor Lavern, and welcome to Reflections. So I've been reflecting on the book of Genesis chapter 4, and the Bible reveals to us two characters, Cain and Abel, two brothers who are born of parents who are not born, but parents who are created from the hand of God itself. If there was anyone who could boast of God as their grandfather, if there ever was anything like that, it was Cain and Abel. And yet we see that in the life of Cain and Abel, there are some religious concepts which we can derive from them. Sister White tells us that these two were trained in the same school of religion. Both of them were worshippers. I've heard some people who speak of Cain as a heathen or as someone who worshipped idols. That is not true. Both Cain and Abel worshipped God, the Creator. Both Cain and Abel knew the same religious information and were trained in the same religious understanding. In fact, we are told that both Cain and Abel built altars. But the difference in Cain and Abel stems from the difference in their characters. Abel thought of the atoning sacrifice that prefigured the sacrifice that Jesus would do on the cross of Calvary as God's mercy towards mankind who had run away from God. Cain, on the other hand, viewed the religious system as a God who is unfair and a God who is just after blood. But greater than that is the truth that these two children are a representation of the two types of righteousness that we might find in the religious Christian world. There are those who come to God based on the instruction that God had given them. Or there are those who come to God based on the instruction that God has given. For God had instructed that the worshippers must come with animal sacrifices. And those are represented by Abel, who comes with a righteousness that is based on faith, righteousness by faith. But Cain, on the other hand, is a representation of those worshippers who come in their own interpretation of what God has said. Cain represents those worshippers who want to twist God so that God accepts their humanly generated models of worship and righteousness. And so when you look at this, when you look at this account, God responds to each of these worshippers in two different ways. Abel, who represents righteousness by faith, the Bible tells us that God is pleased with Abel and his sacrifice. But Cain, who is a representation of righteousness by works, God looks at him and his sacrifice, and God is displeased. Friends, I want you to appreciate that when we speak of these two concepts of righteousness, we are speaking of righteousness by faith, which entails coming to God in the obedience that God requires of us. Righteousness by works comes by us creating our own models of righteousness, and we expect God to accept them. This is expressed in Cain coming with the fruit of his labor, as opposed to Abel, who comes with the sheep that he has tended. And so the account of Cain and Abel goes further to express not only God's attitude towards the worshippers, not only God's response towards the worshippers, but it also shows us how those who come with their own righteousness respond to those who have been accepted by God. Look at what God says. God says, Cain, if you do right, will you not be accepted? But if you do wrong, behold, sin is lying at the door, and it wishes to have mastery over you. His desire is for you. God, in this context, personifies sin as a predator who is waiting for someone who's doing wrong. And so God says, behold, sin waits at the door, and and he desires to have you, personifying sin. But you must master over him. You must conquer him. How? We conquer sin by doing that which is right. What is that which is right? Doing that which is right is doing what God has said. And so when you look at Genesis chapter 4, it gives us the platform for our understanding of the great controversy. And our understanding of the great controversy is simple. There are two sides. There are those who worship God in truth and in spirit. And there are those who worship God in the way that they want to worship God. They totally ignore what God has said. They totally ignore the tenets of the worship of the true God, which are premised on atonement and righteousness by faith, and thereby creating their own righteousness. They are creating a righteousness that even they themselves cannot measure up to. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 10 expresses it beautifully. And he says, my heart's desire and prayer for Israel is that they may be saved, for I can confess and attest that they are zealous, but not out of knowledge. John chapter 17 verse 3, this is life eternal, that they may know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. The hallmark of the religious world in the last days will be seen by those who obey a simple, thus saith the Lord, versus those who obey the commandments and the tenets and the institutions of mankind. Joshua closes it beautifully when he says, choose you this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. God bless you as you reflect on Genesis chapter 4.